All right. Thank you, Laura, for organising everything. Even if I'm on the list of organisers, I think Laura has done a big job. And I'm very happy to be able to present something here. And also a bit sorry for sending a paper quite late. My research then is about school closures. And this is kind of the quite old project. It's 4 years old now. And particularly it's kind of ongoing all the time, because just after when I got the money for doing the research, I got twins, and then it's kind of they have to compete with each other all the time, so it's kind of which one is more important. Anyway, it's all related with children anyway. Idea with this kind of why at all study school closures? Like, what's kind of, is it really interesting issue by itself empirically, or is it more about the social movement outcomes or protest outcomes as such? And I think actually the case is so much interesting by itself, and mostly because it's kind of in many other countries as well. It's not only in Sweden when local municipalities really close the schools, and it really influences local people, particularly of course those children who have to often travel many hours in a bus afterwards. Or, like, there is always kind of the two sides of the story. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. The good thing is that they might get into much better school if their own old school is closed down. But most often it is at least framed like that as soon as somebody wants to close down our school, we have to move. And who wants to move really? And people are always like protesting against that. We don't want to have a change of environment from our children. And in particularly the Swedish case, it's been really, really emotional. Like, when you read about Swedish political culture, it's not really traditional that you see it's kind of emotional protest actions. It tend to be negotiations, different kind of parties trying to get agreements. While in the case of school protest, you really can hear different parents calling politicians Nazis, which is extreme cases, threatening people. There are several cases of violence. The local politicians have to call police to protect them. And that's something we don't really think that will happen in some of the countries at least. So it is kind of, it's really interesting is what's going on there. And another part is this, that when you read about these things in media, you really see that the titles that, the protest managed to save the school. Or, despite many protests, the government went on and closed the school. And there has this kind of variation really in the media, you say, that either the protest matters or does not matter. So that was my motivation for taking up the issue. And I'll just give you kind of a really short idea, how does it function. It's kind of typical case where government wants to do something and people mobilize against it. And it's more detailed maybe written in a paper, but idea is that usually because there are two reasons why the schools could be closed down. Either the municipality does so badly economically, so they don't have any finances, so they have to cut their budget somewhere. And in addition to cutting in many other places, they go to the school budget. And they propose, we have to limit the costs, so we close a few schools. Another thing is that they really realize that they don't have any children to go to school. Like, next year there will be 3 people. So maybe it would be reasonable to close that school, and those 3 people should go another one. Sometimes they work together, and particularly in up north municipalities where you have very scattered population, you have many cases where the municipality does bad economically and there are very few people because they've all moved to the city or Stockholm. So these are the usual reasons that are given by the bureaucratic or those who prepare the proposals to close the school. But as soon as there is some kind of knowledge about they will close the school, it doesn't even have to be official proposal yet, but as soon as it leaks out somewhere, somebody has asked somewhere, or the media gets access to some papers, people start to mobilize. Quite often, not always. You see later how many cases there are that there hasn't been any protest as well. But often then, as soon as the rumor is out, they go and mobilize against it. And often the politicians actually take up the issue and discuss that in their, and they have a specific board for school issues in the municipal governments, and they, at least they have to take up the issue and discuss the protest letters that have been sent to them. Like, that's kind of the way it works. So in that sense, they cannot say that we're not aware of it. They always have to take up somehow. And of course, when the media reports the large actions, then they sometimes say something about that. But that, of course, doesn't say that they have to give a concession to the protesters. They can totally ignore them and go on and close the school, or they can really say that, all right, we think about it, and we're not to do that. And again, the protests can continue quite a while. So I have cases which they go on for ages. I think the longest time is actually 18 years, because the issue comes up occasionally. Like first of all, they have started to close the school around 91. Then they said, all right, we're not going to close it. And then after a few years, they took up the issue again. So it comes and goes all the time. And it lasts until today. The school is still there. But the parents always have to keep eye on the media, at least, or somewhere, that maybe they kind of close again. So that's kind of issue behind that. And by looking at the issues, I was really wondering that, okay, do those protests actually matter? Because you see so many times that, okay, social movements matter when you have this kind of big issue in the literature on that, or they don't matter. In my case, they are not social movements. It's just a small, not in my backyard events, actually, because usually these relate to that, please do not close my school. And I have even the cases where they refer, no, that school over there, that one you can close. Often like more economically, maybe worse situation or something. And they try to really say that, like, not our school. So it's clear this kind of not in my backyard effect, which might not work exactly the same as the social movement literature. So or social movements in general. So that might be interesting case to look at. And of course there is another question, like what explains the difference? Like if we can see that there is some kind of influence of protest actions, that they really managed to stop the closure, or at least that the politicians will not close it on this year, but maybe close it on later on. Maybe there are some kind of factors that could explain it. And then again, the entire prior research on social movement outcomes could be influential or helpful for explaining that. And I kind of looked at a few ideas what could be the things, and then asking the questions like that maybe it's related to what kind of protests are, like who the mobilizes and which kind of actions they take, or what kind of parties are in power, the traditional questions. But also that maybe it is just the socio-democratic or economic things that matter, so all these kind of control variables, that maybe there's nothing to do with the protest actions or political parties at all. Or maybe they're all somehow interrelated, which could be also the case. So I kind of took the traditional theoretical idea, or at least what I think this could work in this case, and particularly assume that politicians who have to make a decision about closure, they would listen to protest activists, mostly because they want to get re-elected. Like, these are my electorate there close by protesting, or they really don't want to have it. It's like things happening in our municipality because they disturb our usual life. There are many cases where, for example, the politicians have to deal with hundreds of postcards sent by different students, and it's like not the students, pupils, and it just blocks their mailbox, for example, or it blocks their real mailbox, and often come by the real mail. So it's kind of inconvenient. Okay, it disrupts their lives, but also obviously their others' life when there's huge demonstrations. But also something which I kind of recognize that there's many politicians, when you talk to them, they say that it's it's not good to walk around the city and then people come and say that you want to close my school, because it's a municipality, it's a local thing. It's not like a huge national politics where they don't meet, but they really see each other. Not always, but in quite many cases, it's like that you can actually recognize a politician and go and say when you're standing in a queue somewhere or waiting for something in a bus that really don't do that. So it's kind of emotional issue for politicians maybe as well. And obviously then we have this idea of political preferences, that because it is the issue, like in many cases in the political issues, that we have to cut the budget. So often you would think that maybe the right-wing politicians are all for cutting the budget, and then the left-wing politicians maybe would not do that. The school issues is not so clear. That it might be some kind of differences, because often there is maybe it's not only cutting the budget, maybe it's just improving the quality of education, and that might not be so clear ideological case. So what I did then is that I kind of calculate or collected all the data about schools that have been threatened in actually 290 municipalities there are in Sweden. At the moment I have double-checked data for 280, so I have 10 left. But let's say that almost all municipalities, so it's like, you could think about that there are 280 countries over the 30 years, and then they have proposed to close quite many schools, 1,144, and let's say kind of more than half of them have been really closed down. But there have been almost 1,000 protest actions as well, and some of them have been successful, some of them have not been. And I've looked also which kind of actions there are. So I've used the news media just to collect all the protest data and the information about the school proposal that it's come from the municipalities themselves and the media check. So it's kind of double checked. It's not just because municipalities didn't report properly. Those who had protest, they said, sorry, we didn't close any schools, and then when you look, actually, they did. So I couldn't rely on their data. So what I do is that I kind of set up some kind of event history analysis, thinking about that as soon as a school is threatened, it's kind of like a sick person you need treated, and I can consider that protest as a treatment, so that if the protest as treatment helps, that's kind of the school will survive. And the idea is to see that maybe the protest will prolong the life of a school. And that's kind of the idea. I've modeled it. I must say that's kind of, I'm not sure exactly that I've done properly everything, but I hope. I will need to do a few tests more. But what I found then is that if you have at least one protest, that will help survive the risk of closure is decreases. And the same thing if you calculate how many protests there have been for a particular school, that effect is even larger. But there is a question that because this number of events that has taken place is probably related how long the school was under the threat. So you don't want to use that kind of, is not that fact. But saving you from the numbers, I can kind of focused on this school or the protest actions really mattered. But more interesting was the issues like then what is the political majority behind that, or how that functioned. And then I looked the left-wing majority and the right-wing majority, and many of the Swedish coalitions or the municipal governments are coalitions. It's not just one party in power, there are always 2 or 3, often nowadays even 4. And my kind of idea was that if there is some kind of across ideologies coalition, that they should work maybe like they should have maybe harder times to close the schools. What I found is that actually the left-wing governments closed down the schools, which was kind of, I didn't expect that much more than the others. And what I know now, and if I look at my data clearly, I know exactly what it is. Many of the so-called left coalitions are not coalitions, they're singly ruled by a Social Democratic Party up in the north. And up in the north means in Sweden that there are huge municipalities where there are very many small schools that have been closed down over history. But it's only one party in power, meaning that you don't need to negotiate with anybody, you just can do whatever you want quite often. And because it's a huge place, probably the politicians do not feel so much offended if you close down a school somewhere 40 or 50 kilometers away. So that's probably the reason, but I need to figure out more. Another thing what I looked at, and I actually was most interested in, was that we always talk about the influence of political allies. Like when we study the social movement outcomes, we tend to think that it's important that there is some party supporting our ideas. In the school closure case, it wasn't really easy to see who is the ally, because sometimes it was a party, or often it was of course a party in opposition, but as soon as they got to power, they closed that school. So it was not so much help, like they were supporting it, then they turned to be not an ally again. And that's the reason why I needed to check like how all the parties react to that. And there I didn't see very clear tendencies, but what I can see is that the most liberal party, the moderates, they're also in national way at the moment in power, they tended to be really fast in closing the schools. For others, the effect was more unclear. While when I look also the cases specifically, you can also see that the moderates rarely are kind of, even if they are in opposition, sometimes, in many cases, they still like say that maybe we should go on now, but it's much less than in other parties, so that maybe this is kind of the good trend, but I think there should be more checks on that. And my hope that there will be some kind of interesting interaction effect with protest and some kind of allies or anything, that didn't come up at all, so probably more work to be done there. I think my time's up, so I kind of, I don't tell you how I'm going to improve the thing, but I will tell you one thing which I think is kind of important from the democratic perspective, or kind of normative idea, is that we tend to think that often, like, you know, the social movements ideas are supported by the public, but in this case the school closures really could actually play different crowds against it, and then if they are successful, well, is that something that even we know that in general Swedish people do not approve the school closures. In practical cases, they might actually oppose it, like the closure. And it's kind of interesting that we don't have the public opinion data on particular schools, so we can't test it. But it's kind of interesting issues how that plays out. Yeah, thank you very much.